The Zalvanni High Command believed they were the most advanced civilization in the known galaxy. They had conquered dozens of worlds. They had subjugated countless species. And they had never known fear. Until they made one mistake. A mistake that would haunt them forever. They detained human children. And now, they were about to learn why that was the dumbest decision in the history of the universe. The kidnapping incident. The Zalvanni Security Patrol intercepted a Terran civilian transport on the outer rim of their territory. They scanned its cargo. No weapons. No military personnel. No classified technology. Just 24 human children on a school trip. And so, the Zalvanni, being arrogant fools, did what they always did when encountering non-Zalvanni trespassers. They detained them. For processing. For interrogation. For cultural assessment. Because surely, the Terrans would do nothing over a few detained civilians. After all, the Zalvanni Empire was mighty. Humanity was just another species. Right. Wrong. The message sent to Earth. A standard diplomatic transmission was sent to the Terran Federation. Your juveniles have been detained for unlawful trespassing. They are unharmed. They will be assessed before we determine their status. It was meant to be routine. A mere formality. A gesture of power. A reminder that the Zalvanni dictated the laws of the galaxy. But they forgot one thing. Humans don't abandon their own. And they definitely don't tolerate threats to their children. The response from Earth. The reply arrived within minutes. It was not diplomatic. It was not friendly. It was just 3 words. Return them. Now. The Zalvanni laughed. How arrogant these Terrans were. They thought their demands mattered? The Zalvanni Command Council drafted a formal response. Terran juveniles are under Zalvanni jurisdiction. Your request has been noted and will be reviewed in... They never finished the message. Because at that moment, the sky over their capital darkened. And for the first time in their history, the Zalvanni felt fear. The Terran response fleet arrives. They had expected a delegation. They had expected negotiations. They had expected bureaucracy. Instead, they got warships. Massive. Armored. Silent. Terran dreadnoughts, cruisers, and destroyers appeared in Zalvanni orbit, emerging from hyperspace like silent executioners. No warning. No diplomatic courtesies. No second chances. And then, a final message was transmitted to the Zalvanni High Command. It was audio only. A low, cold voice. A warning. You have 1 hour to return them, or we come down there and take them ourselves. The Zalvanni Supreme Chancellor felt something he had never felt before. Terror. Because it wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. And he had no doubt that humanity would keep it. The Zalvanni High Command had ruled for centuries with unquestioned authority. They had faced rebellions. They had survived wars. They had crushed entire civilizations. But they had never faced this. An entire Terran war fleet in their skies. A countdown ticking. And a cold, merciless warning hanging over them like a guillotine. You have 1 hour to return them. 1 hour. 60 minutes. And the galaxy would never be the same. The Zalvanni panic begins. Inside the Imperial War Chamber, Supreme Chancellor Vex Ree stood frozen, his claws digging into the armrest of his throne. His advisors were shouting over one another. The humans wouldn't dare attack. They're bluffing. This is a negotiation tactic. We should delay them. Stall for time. But one voice cut through the noise. Grand Strategist Olentrak. The only Zalvanni officer who had studied human history. And the only one who knew what was about to happen. Silence. The entire chamber fell into hushed tension. They're not bluffing, Olentrak said. They won't negotiate. They won't stall. If the clock runs out, they will come. The other advisors scoffed. We are the Zalvanni Empire. One of them spat. We have defenses. Armies. Fleets. Olentrak turned to the massive war map in front of them. He gestured at the sky above their capital. At the silent Terran warships hovering like predators. Then he pulled up a historical archive. Tell me, he asked. What do you know about a place called Fallujah? Silence. The human reputation. Olentrak didn't speak in theory. He had read the records. He had studied their wars. And what he found terrified him. He activated a holomap of Earth's history. Conflicts spanning centuries appeared before the High Command. And what they saw made their blood run cold. Humans do not abandon their own. Humans do not forgive threats to their young. And when provoked, humans do not stop. The Zalvani officials watched in horror as they saw patterns emerge. Wars where humans had fought against impossible odds, and won. Wars where they had taken devastating losses, but refused to surrender. Wars where they had responded to threats against their civilians with overwhelming, merciless force. And then, the most chilling record of all. A historical excerpt from the 21st century. A journalist's quote during a human war. A message that should have been a warning to the Zalvani. The only thing more terrifying than an enemy with nothing to lose is a human with something to protect. The deadline approaches. The countdown had reached 30 minutes. The Terran fleet had not moved. They were waiting. But the moment the clock hit 0, they would attack. Supreme Chancellor Vex Ree turned to Olentrak, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "You're saying they would burn our entire world over children?" Olentrak met his gaze. "No," he said. "I'm saying they'd do it for one child. And you took 24. The human transmission. With 15 minutes left, the Zalvani finally received a direct transmission from the Terran fleet. A single human appeared on the screen. Not a politician. Not a diplomat. Not even a high-ranking military officer. Just a soldier. A Terran Marine. His face was calm. Emotionless. Cold. And he spoke without anger. "This is your last warning. Release the children, or we come down there and get them ourselves." His eyes didn't blink. His voice didn't waver. He simply said one more thing. "And if we have to come down there won't be a Zalvani empire left when we're done." The screen cut to black. And all across the Zalvani homeworld, one thing became very, very clear. This was not a negotiation. This was a threat. And they only had minutes left to decide. The choice. The Zalvani High Command had two options. Keycap 1 refuse, and face extinction. Keycap 2 comply, and live with the shame of surrender. For the first time in Zalvani history, they chose surrender. The return of the children. With mere minutes left on the clock, the Zalvani rushed the detained children to the nearest shuttle bay. A fleet of Terran dropships descended. Heavily armed. Heavily armored. They landed without hesitation, the ramp doors hissing open. And from them, Terran Marines stepped out. Not to negotiate. Not to talk. But to retrieve their own. The walk of shame. As the Zalvani officials handed over the terrified human children, they noticed something strange. The Terran Marines weren't angry. They weren't shouting. They weren't hostile. They were silent. And that silence was the most terrifying thing of all. Because anger fades. But silence means they haven't forgotten. And they never will. The final message. As the last child was loaded onto the dropship, a Terran Marine captain turned to the Zalvani Chancellor. His expression was unreadable. His voice was devoid of emotion. But his words, they were unmistakable. "We're taking them home. But know this. The only reason your species is still breathing right now is because we don't want to waste ammunition." The Chancellor swallowed. He wanted to respond. But what could he possibly say? Because deep down, he knew the truth. He had just barely survived the greatest mistake in Zalvani history. And next time, there would be no mercy. The lesson the galaxy never forgot. The incident was never spoken of again. The Zalvani Empire never provoked humanity again. And across the galaxy, one lesson was burned into history. A lesson that would never be forgotten. You can threaten humans. You can fight humans. You can even make war with humans. But you never, ever take their children. Because if you do, there won't be anything left of your civilization when they're done with you. The Zalvani homeworld still stood. Its cities remained intact. Its skies remained clear. Its people still breathed. But make no mistake, they had been spared. Not out of mercy. Not out of diplomacy, not out of weakness, but because the Terrans had chosen to let them live. And the galaxy never forgot it. The war that never happened. When the Terran dropships left the surface, carrying the rescued human children, the Zalvani breathed a sigh of relief. Their leaders tried to convince themselves that the threat was over, that the Terrans would leave them alone now, that the incident was behind them. But they were wrong. Because humanity hadn't left. They were still watching. And the Zalvani would feel their presence every single day for the rest of their existence. The silent war begins. The Zalvani Empire was never officially at war with humanity. There were no battles recorded, no formal declarations, no treaties signed. And yet, in the days following the incident, the Zalvani High Command began to notice something alarming. Their trade networks collapsing, their supply chains interrupted, their allies pulling away. Because while humanity didn't strike militarily, they didn't need to. They had already won. The first retaliation, economic warfare. The Terran Federation didn't fire a single shot. Instead, they whispered. They spoke to the galactic markets, to the trade hubs, to the corporate entities that made the Zalvani economy thrive. And without a single official sanction, the Zalvani credit system began to wither. Suppliers refused to sell to them. Merchants refused to transport their goods. Even neutral planets started closing their borders. The Zalvani Empire wasn't being invaded. It was being isolated. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. The second retaliation, tactical sabotage. The Zalvani military prided itself on its naval superiority. They had warships in every sector. They had fleets that controlled hyperlanes. They had bases that enforced their dominance. But now, they were malfunctioning. Their battleships kept experiencing catastrophic power failures. Their communications networks were mysteriously failing at critical moments. Their weapon systems would suddenly shut down during combat exercises. It was never traced back to humanity. There were no spies caught, no evidence of hacking, no admissions of guilt. But everyone knew. Because when a Zalvani admiral dared to accuse a Terran diplomat, the humans simply smiled. If we wanted you gone, Admiral, you'd already be gone. And that was the last time any Zalvani official ever made a threat toward humanity. The political collapse. The final blow wasn't military. It wasn't economic. It wasn't sabotage. It was psychological. Because after months of instability, fear, and humiliation, the Zalvani ruling council began to fracture. The Supreme Chancellor was overthrown. The new leader tried to restore order. But it was too late. Their people had lost faith. They knew the truth. They had provoked Deathworlders. And they were paying the price. The human warning. In a final act of desperation, the new Zalvani leadership reached out to the Terran Federation. They begged for a summit. They pleaded for negotiations. And to their surprise, humanity agreed. A delegation was sent. They met on neutral ground. The Zalvani Chancellor, humbled and afraid, sat across from the Terran diplomat. And after a long silence, he finally spoke. We regret our actions. We wish to repair relations. What do you want from us? The human diplomat leaned forward. He did not smile. He did not threaten. He simply said one thing. Remember this feeling. The Zalvani Chancellor frowned. What do you mean? The human's eyes darkened. The fear in your bones. The uncertainty in your mind. The knowledge that a single mistake almost erased your entire species. He let the words sink in. Then he stood up. Never forget it. Because if you ever touch our children again, you won't get a warning next time. The meeting ended. And with it, so did the Zalvani's place in the Galactic Order. The lesson that echoed across the stars. The incident was never spoken of in Zalvani history. They erased all records of it. They rewrote their laws. They forbade their children from even uttering the word Terran. But the rest of the galaxy, they never forgot. Because the Zalvani had taught every civilization one undeniable truth. You can fight humans. You can hate humans. You can even go to war with humans. But you never ever take their children. Because if you do, you might survive the war. But you will never, ever survive the aftermath. The Zalvani Empire still existed. Its cities still stood. Its people still breathed. Its fleets still patrolled the stars. But it was no longer an empire. It was a ghost of what it once was. Because the Zalvani had learned the hardest lesson in the galaxy. A lesson they would never forget. And neither would anyone else. The fall of an empire without war. The Zalvani High Command had always believed power came from military strength. That warships and soldiers determined a species' dominance. That territory and conquest defined supremacy. But humanity had proven them wrong. Because the Terrans had won this war, without ever firing a shot. They had used fear, isolation, precision, and it had destroyed the Zalvani more thoroughly than any invasion ever could. No battlefields, no heroics, no last stands, just cold, calculated retribution. And the Zalvani still felt it, every single day. The aftermath that never ended. The Zalvani government still functioned. But it wasn't the same. Their leadership was weak. Their military was paranoid. Their economy was a fraction of what it once was. And worst of all, their fear never faded. Every year, on the anniversary of the incident, the Zalvani High Command held a secret emergency meeting. They reviewed their defenses. They analyzed their fleet strength. They reinforced every major city. And then, they did nothing. Because deep down they knew, if the humans ever wanted them gone, they would be. The lesson spread across the galaxy. The incident became a warning to every species in the universe. Whenever a new empire rose, whenever a new warlord sought conquest, a whisper followed them. A message that had become legend. You can fight humans. You can make war with humans. But if you ever touch their young, you will not survive the consequences. Because the Zalvani hadn't been destroyed, but they had been broken. And for the rest of galactic history, every species knew why. The last Zalvani Chancellor. Decades passed. The Zalvani Empire continued to shrink. One by one, their former colonies declared independence. One by one, their allies abandoned them. One by one, their great cities crumbled. Until, eventually, there was nothing left. The last Zalvani Chancellor stood in the ruins of the once great Imperial War Room. His claws traced the edges of an old, cracked holoscreen. A screen that had once displayed the Terran ultimatum. You have 1 hour to return them. He let out a shuddering breath. Even now, after all these years, that message still haunted him. It was the day everything changed. The day his people lost their future. And for what? Because they had underestimated humanity. Because they had made the single greatest mistake in history. Because they had dared to take human children. And now, there was nothing left of the Zalvani but ghosts. Final transmission from the Terran Federation. Long after the Zalvani had faded from power, the Terran Federation sent a final message to the galaxy. It was brief. It was simple. It was absolute. We did not destroy the Zalvani Empire. We did not conquer their homeworld. We did not need to. They destroyed themselves the moment they took what was ours. The transmission ended. And across the galaxy, everyone listened. Everyone understood. Because now, it was a universal truth. The lesson that became law. After the incident, the Galactic Council enacted the most ironclad law in interstellar history. No species shall, under any circumstances, detain, harm, or interfere with human juveniles. It became law in every empire, every government, every military. Not because of morality, not because of diplomacy, but because of fear. Because the galaxy knew. If any species was foolish enough to make that mistake again, there wouldn't be a second warning. There would only be fire and silence. Because humans may be patient. They may be reasonable. But when it comes to their young, they do not forgive. And they do not forget. The end.